Hey everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back to the channel. So an important topic in the Shopify space recently is around checkout extensibility. Right now, Shopify Plus merchants have the ability to modify their checkout page by making edits to the checkout.liquid file in their theme code. But Shopify has now deprecated that functionality and will completely stop supporting it by next year. To replace the checkout.liquid functionality, they've added what they call checkout extensibility, which still gives merchants the ability to modify their checkout page, but it will require some app knowledge and development to do so. So if you're a Plus merchant needing to port over some existing functionality over to checkout extensibility, or if you're just an app developer wanting to learn more about checkout extensibility, you're in the right place. Not only are we going to build a checkout UI extension today, we're going to be doing it in 30 minutes using a tool called Gadget. Gadget is an e-commerce app development platform, which in our case for Shopify, handles practically every aspect of the backend and server setup and management so that we can just focus on coding right from the start. They're also the sponsor of today's video and the first official sponsor of my channel. I'm really glad that they reached out about working together because as I've played around with Gadget myself the past month or so, it's clear to me that this is something that will help way more developers enter the space and almost entirely eliminate the common roadblocks and blockers that come up when people want to get started. And just as a side note, all the commentary I share on Gadget today will be my own thoughts and opinions, and all of it is based on, again, my own experience with Gadget. I've already built a couple apps with it. I continue using it and paying for it because I really do think it's an extremely useful platform. So make sure you watch to the end to hear more about my own thoughts on Gadget and whether it's right for you. So the app we're building today will allow for merchants to display a simple review on the checkout page in order to give some social proof and increase conversions. There's going to be two parts to this. There's the Shopify admin app where merchants can configure the review content such as customer name and review text, and then the checkout extension portion, which will take our configured review and render it on the actual checkout page. If this is your first time ever doing anything with Shopify app development, make sure you go through the first time setup guide on shopify.dev or check out my video where I walk you through that process. Before we do this, you'll also need to just create a development store that has the checkout extensibility preview enabled. It's as simple as going to the stores page in the partner dashboard, adding a store, and making sure that you check the checkout extensibility option. And with that, we're ready to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come into our partner dashboard. We're going to go to the apps page, and then we're going to click here on create app. We're going to create the app manually. So we'll come in here and just call this featured review app, and we'll click create. Now we have an app created in the admin, and if we were doing this the standard way, instead of using Gadget, we'd go into our terminal, generate a new app from the CLI template, then hook it up to this app we just created and spin up a local server and all of that to get the app set up. Now with Gadget, it takes less than a minute and all we need are these two values right here, the client ID and the client secret. So we'll head over to gadget.dev, and if you don't have an account, make sure you sign up for one. And then we're going to come here to create a new app. We're going to give it the same name as our app in the admin, featured review app. Then we're going to click this connect to Shopify option. And we're going to want to do this partners option here. And all we need here is the client ID and client secret that it just gave us in the Shopify admin. So we'll come over here, paste these values in, copy the secret. Then we'll click connect. Okay, so for scopes, for the app we're building today, we actually don't need any scopes, but we're going to go ahead and just add the read product scope because you do need at least one scope in order to install the app. Then we'll click confirm here at the bottom, and it'll give us two URLs, an app URL and a redirection URL. So these we'll be able to just copy them, and we'll go back to our Shopify admin. We'll go to the app setup page, and then we're just going to replace these with the URLs that Gadget provided us, just like that in those two fields. We'll click save. Once that's saved, we're going to come back over to the overview page. We'll click select store, and then you just want to make sure you select a store that has the checkout extensibility preview enabled. So we're going to install it on this one. We'll go ahead and install the app. And there we go. We've got our app created. So right now you might be thinking, what about configuring our auth routes or setting up the database or setting up session management or API routes? We literally don't need to do anything for that because Gadget took care of it for us. This is a real superpower that comes with this platform and why you can get up and running, including hosting, in literal minutes. So now let's go back to the Gadget dashboard over here and take a look around. If this is your first time opening up Gadget, it might look a little overwhelming at first. There is some complexity to the platform, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to the interface. But what's helpful for now to know is just to break these up into two main sections. The data model section is basically everything related to your database and anything that affects your data. And then the files section here is everything related to actual code. Both the front end and things like custom server routes. These data models can be thought of as tables or objects in your database. And if you click on one of these models and then click on the data tab up here, you can see kind of a more traditional database view of all of the objects within that model. So this is for the Shopify shop model. And you can see the single shop that we've installed the app on so far and all of the properties for it. There are other things you can do with data models like actions and effects, which are found under the model tab. We don't need those for this app, but just as a quick example, say you wanted to send yourself a text every time an order is created in Shopify. So in our scenario, say a new order comes in, a create action is triggered, it goes through, it applies the fields and everything saves a record to the database. Then we could come in here in success effects, add a new file, and add the code in for it to send us a text when the order comes through. It's really neat to be able to add your own workflows here really easily. And on the Shopify specific models, that's also how you're able to handle webhooks. So for our review app, we could add a data model here to store our reviews and then work with that to fetch and update data. But since we're working with the checkout UI extension, we're going to actually use shop metafields to store our data. So the data will actually live in Shopify on the shop itself, and we'll just communicate with Shopify to read and update that Metafield data. Thankfully, Gadget can handle and work with Metafields very well. So here on this Shopify shop model, if you come over to the left, you can see the fields, which are just all the fields that an installed shop will have in our database. And we're just going to come up here and add a new field, and we're going to call it featured review. Then we're going to check this box here that says store data from Shopify Metafield, and that just indicates to Gadget that this is a metafield that we're going to be updating and reading from. Every metafield has a namespace and a key. So for this one, let's just give it a namespace of featured-review, and the key will just be review. Then we're going to click this register namespace button. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and give this a metafield type of JSON, and same thing down here, JSON type. And that's it for our added metafield. And then we can see it right here on the left. If we click the data tab and scroll all the way to the end, you can see that that field is now on our installed shop, and it'll be there for every installed shop that we have from here after. And by checking that metafield option on this field, we've basically just told Gadget, hey, this field will be coming directly from Shopify in a metafield that has this namespace and this key. And that's all we need to do as far as database setup to be able to store our reviews. Again, we could have created a data model for our reviews, and that's what you'll be doing probably in most all other cases. But for our app, metafields will work a little better with the checkout UI extension. So now we're ready to get into the actual code. Gadget recently released hosted front ends. It's in beta right now. So you now have all your application code in one place with a built-in editor. If we open up one of these files, you can see there's a built-in editor here. So you can really do everything related to our app directly from the Gadget interface. This shop page file is currently the home page of our app that we're seeing here when we open that up. So in this shop page component, we're actually just going to select everything and delete it. Just start with a clean file. So we'll start by just creating the component, shop page, and then we're going to export that as the default export. To build the UI, we're going to be using Shopify Polaris, which I've talked about in other videos. It's Shopify's design and component library. So for building admin apps, you'll get standardized components like this to keep the same look and feel across the admin. So to start, we're going to go ahead and just create a simple card. There are a few things we need to import first from the Shopify Polaris library. So we're going to go ahead and bring those in. We're going to bring in the page component, the layout component, and then let's bring in the alpha card as well. And those will just be imported from at Shopify Polaris. So practically any component or page that you create in the UI using Shopify Polaris will start with a page. And then within that page will be a layout. And then we're going to give our page a title real quick. We'll just call it featured review. And then within the layout, we're going to add a layout.section child component. And then within that, we're going to go ahead and add our alpha card. Okay, so we'll save that and come over here and see what that looks like. Sometimes you have to refresh to get the changes to show up, but for the most part, they'll happen automatically as you're editing. Okay, so there we go. We have our page with the title featured review and just a basic card with no content. Something important to note is that this alpha card component is in alpha currently, so it'll probably change soon after making this video. So make sure you check the Polaris documentation. If it tells you that alpha card isn't available or something, check the documentation and see what the most up-to-date components are. So we're going to go ahead and import the rest of the components from Polaris that we'll need. So up here, we're going to be bringing in the alpha stack component, the text component, the form layout, and text field components. And I'll be explaining what these do as we use them here below. So within this layout.section component, we've got our alpha card. And within this alpha card, we're going to use the alpha stack. And this is another one where, as it says in the name, it's in alpha. I think it's actually currently, as I'm making this video, being updated. So it's very likely that the name of this component will have changed. I believe they're going to be calling it vertical stack. But again, you'll have to check the documentation to keep up to date on that. But what this does is it just creates a vertical stack of its children. And then we can add things like spacing in between each element and center and align them. So it's very useful. The first thing we're going to add inside of this stack is a text component. And we'll just add the text review details. And this is going to be the header of the card. So the text component has a couple props that we need to use to make sure that we get the right appearance of the text. The first prop is called variant, and we're going to set that equal to heading MD. And then the next prop is as, and we're going to set that equal to H2. So these props control the appearance of the text and how they show up in the HTML markup as well. This combo will give us a nice bold heading for the card, and it'll show up as an H2 element. There are a bunch of other text variants that you can use for practically any situation. So anytime you need to display text in your app, you should be using this component with a different variation value that will work for your use case. After this text component, we're going to add in a form. And then within that, we'll add the form layout component. This form layout is just going to format our text fields nicely, so it adds some spacing, some padding, and just makes it look nicer. And inside of this form layout, we're going to add two text field components. We're going to set the label for the first one to customer name, and the label for the second one to review text. So when we take a look in the UI, we can see the card, we can see the title, and the two fields with their labels. The text heading and the form fields are a little too close together, so if we come back to the code, to this alpha stack component, then we can add a gap property, and we'll just set that to 5, and that'll just add some spacing between the children. So between this text and the form, it'll add that gap of 5, and that looks much better. Now we need these text fields to be editable, of course, because right now we can't type in them. So to do that, we're going to add in some state variables. And we're going to add in two variables, one for customer name and its setter, and then another one for review text. And then we need to make sure that we are importing use state from React. Okay. And so now we can go ahead and set the value prop of these text fields to customer name for this first one and review text for the second one. And then we're going to go ahead and set the on change prop of the text field to just our setters. And that will take care of the updating for us. Okay, so now we come back over here and our fields are editable. So now that the text fields are hooked up to our state, we need to find a way to take these review details and save them to that featured review Metafield that we added to the shop. So to do that, we're going to add a new route on our server, which will take in our review details and then update the shop metadata using the GraphQL API. And again, Gadget provides a lot of helpers and makes this process super smooth. So we're going to come in here into the routes folder, and we're just going to click the add icon to add a new file, and then we're going to click on rename. So the naming convention is the method in all caps, like you see here, get dash, and then the name of the file or the name of the route. So in our case, we want a post route, so we'll do post dash, and then we'll call this route update review and click rename. So with Gadget, this request object has a few important props that we can use to make working with data much easier here. You have access to things like request.api, which makes it much easier to query and update any data models you have here directly. The one we're going to be using right now is the connections property on that request object. So this is kind of like a helper to make it easier to work with Shopify. For example, we need to get the ID of the shop that made the request. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called shop ID. And then we're going to access that request.connections.shopify.current shop ID. And this returns a number type for us. So we actually want a string. So we're just going to call toString on that. And that'll give us the shop ID of the shop that made this request. So next we need to actually save the review coming through to this route and update the Metafield value with the review details we passed through. In Gadget's documentation, under their guides section, they actually do have an example of writing a Metafield value. You can see right here, this is what it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and copy that and just paste that over, since it's pretty much exactly what we need. And there are a lot of things like that that you can find just by going through the Gadget documentation and searching for it. So we'll come in here, paste that snippet. This needs to be request.connections. And you can see this is going through getting the Shopify, the current client connection, and then making a GraphQL query on our behalf. So again, the connections object comes in very helpful here. We can leave pretty much everything here the same. We're just going to fill in our Metafield values here. So for the key, we had put review. The namespace was featured-review. For the owner ID, which is just in this case, the ID of the shop. And then right here, we're just going to throw in our shop ID that we grabbed. For the type, we're going to change that to JSON. And then for the value, we're going to set that equal just to the request.body. We're going to close out this request by just returning a 200 success message. So we'll do reply.send success, and we'll await that. So now let's go back to our shop page file here and set it up so we can call our new route to update the review using our state variables. So you can see that there's an api.js file in here, and this actually just exports the API client that we can use for things like making secure requests from the front end, and you can also access our data models directly from here. So we're going to import that into our component. And then we're going to create a new function here called save review. And inside of this function, we're going to call api.connection.fetch. And the URL is going to be, it's just relative to our routes folder. So we can just do /update_review, which is our post route that we just added in. This fetch method here works the same as the native browser fetch method, but it allows us to access the extra context on our server route, such as that connections object where we could find the shop ID, and we can verify that the request coming through was authorized. So the second parameter here is just going to be the options object. We're going to add in the method of post, and then the body prop is just going to be a stringified version of an object containing our customer name and review text. So we'll need a button to trigger this save function. So we're going to add a primary action prop to the page component, and that is going to have two props itself. Content, which will just say save, and then the on action prop, which will be set to save review. So that should be everything we need in order to get the data over to our update review route, which will then take this JSON object and set it to the shop Metafield we created. So let's go back and test it out in our app. We'll refresh to make sure that everything's updated, and it gives us an error. Looks like I used await here without adding the async keyword. So we'll add that, save, and then refresh the page here. And we don't see the button here, so let's go back and see. Okay, so this should just be primary action, not primary action prop. So again, we'll come back, and there, it updated and added the save button. So let's go ahead and fill this in. Just say test customer. This is a test review. Okay, we'll click save. And let's open up the network tab so we can monitor this. We'll click save. Looks like it returned a 200 with success response, which is what we want to see. So to verify that this actually worked, we can come back in here to Gadget, go to our Shopify shop model, go to data, and scroll all the way down. And there we can see our updated values that we just added in from the admin app. So the flow of what happened here is our server route hit the Shopify GraphQL API. It updated that shop Metafield in Shopify. And since our shop model here is listening to the shop update webhook, Gadget was able to receive the webhook, take the new shop data, which included our featured review Metafield, and it updated our database here based on that. So whenever you're updating any fields on the Shopify specific models, the process is to update everything on the Shopify side through their GraphQL API, and then Gadget will listen for those webhooks and update your database records accordingly. So Shopify is always treated as the single source of truth here. Okay, so that was actually the bulk of the setup needed for our app. The last thing we're going to do before moving on to the checkout UI extension is just fetch the Metafield when the app page loads, so we can populate the fields with the current review details. We're going to come back to shop page, and we're just going to add a use effect. And then let's make sure that we are importing that from React. And then within this use effect, we're going to create a new function, which is called fetch review. It's going to be async. And then within this, we can actually use that same API object right here. Again, it has some helpers on it, and in this case, it'll help us fetch the data directly from our Shopify shop model. So to do that, we're going to come in here, we're going to create a new variable called shop, and we'll set that equal to api.shopifyshop.findFirst. And because of the permissions and roles that are set up by default on this Shopify shop model, we're only going to get back the shop data for the current shop we're on. So we don't have to worry about other shop data being brought in here. This shop data being returned will have a featured review prop, which is the field that we added. So as long as that featured review prop is not null or undefined, then we're going to go ahead and set our customer name variable to that featured review dot customer name. And then same thing with the review text. We're going to set the review text to shop.featuredreview.reviewText. And since this is the an empty dependency array, it'll just run on the first page load. So we have that function created. So now at the bottom of the use effect, we're just going to call it fetch review. Now on our first page load, and if we reload the page, it should pre-populate these fields with our current review details. So let's refresh and make sure that works. Cool. All right, it works perfect. It populated it with the basically default values or the current values of the review details that we have in our database. One more thing is I'm just going to make this text field here a multi-line, and we'll just give it 3. And that just makes the text field a bit bigger, which is appropriate for a review text field. So now that our admin app is able to update the review details on the shop side, we're going to go ahead and create the checkout extension portion now. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and open up our terminal, and we're just going to navigate to the folder where we want this app to live. And then we're going to run npm, and I can actually make this a bit bigger so you can see it. We're just going to run npm init at Shopify/app. And then we're going to let that run. And what this is going to do is just set up a Shopify template for us locally. And then we can hook that up to our existing app. Since an extension is an extension of an admin app, we have to do it this way. We'll give it the same name, featured review app. We're going to use the node template, and then we'll just wait a minute for that to run. Okay, so once that finishes, we're going to navigate to the app directory it just created for us, which is featured review app in my case. We'll go into that, and then I'm going to open it up in my code editor just to make it a little bit easier to work with. So this is what the standard template generated from the CLI looks like. If you've done this before, you know that under the web folder is where basically all of the code related to your Shopify app exists. There's the server code and all the front end code and everything. Since all of our code is hosted by Gadget and lives there, we can actually just remove this entire web folder, so we don't need to worry about it. Now we can go back to the terminal, and then we're just going to run npm run dev, which this is going to do basically link this app to our existing app. So we're going to select no, connect it to an existing app. We're going to select our featured review app, and then we're going to select a store. This doesn't really matter. Okay, so once you get to here, that means that you're good to go. Basically, we just needed it to get through this first part where it linked it to our existing app that's hosted by Gadget. Now to create our extension, we have to run npm run Shopify app generate extension. We'll click enter, and that's going to go ahead and create the extension for us. And we're going to select the checkout UI type. We'll just let it do the default name, JavaScript React. Okay, so now that extension has been created. And like it says here, if we run npm run dev, then it will allow us to preview the extension running in a preview checkout. So let's go ahead and do that. And then it's going to give us a link here that we can then copy over and paste it into our browser. And then this second option here that says checkout UI extension is what we want to click. So we should be seeing something different in this checkout page. It looks like this item it added to our cart was out of stock. So let's go just select a different one. Let's do this one. And then we'll remove this from our cart, and hopefully that will fix it. Okay, yeah, so this is what we want to see. And the part that's actually coming from this code right here is this banner. So with checkout UI extensions, there are a few things to cover. One is there's this shopify.ui.extension.toml file. If you open that up, these are the configuration settings for the checkout extension. The important thing that we'll be looking at here is this extension points. There are a number of different places where you can put your code to run. So this one is dynamic. Another important thing is that with checkout UI extensions, they have their own component library. You can see here it's using the banner component. And to render anything on the checkout, you have to use those components. So it is a little limited as far as what you can build or how it looks. But for the most part, you'll be able to do quite a bit of customization, add a lot of different things without it being too much of a burden. So the first thing we're going to do is come back into this toml file, and you can see it where this Metafields option is commented out. Let's remove those comments because we want to be able to access our Metafield from this extension, so we can go ahead and specify the namespace and the key that we need to access. In our case, it was featured-review, and the key was review. For this index.js file, I'm going to go ahead and just paste in the finished code for this just so you can see what that looks like, and then I'll go through every part of it and show you exactly what's going on. So we're importing a few things from this checkout UI extensions React library, which, as I mentioned, is the component library for the checkout UI. This use app metafields hook is how we're able to actually grab the value from our metafield that we had added. This basically just returns all of the metafields associated with the review key and the featured review namespace. And then we need to specify the type, which is it's a shop metafield. Since we add that field directly to the shop, we need to specify that here. And then that will actually return an array of all of the metafields. And I'm going to add a console log statement so you can see exactly what that looks like. So metafields, there. And we'll take a look at that in a second. So if it does return metafields, they exist, then it's going to go ahead and parse out that object in there and give us the featured review object with the customer name and review text values that we need on there. And if there is a featured review, then we're going to go ahead and display that section in the checkout. So we'll save that. And then let's refresh this. Okay, so move this out of the way real quick. So it says our metafields are empty. We should have some data in there. So let's close this out. I think it's because I modified, when you make changes to the toml file, you have to restart the server. So we're going to come back into the terminal, close that out, and just run npm run dev again. Okay, that'll give us a new URL, which we can copy and paste into the browser. We'll close out of these two, and we'll go there. Click checkout UI extension, and okay, I need to remove this from the cart and go through that again real quick. Not sure why it's doing that, hasn't done it before. Okay, so now we should see, there we go. Okay, so now the metafields are actually coming through. And then just so you can see what the code behind this little section looks like, they've got a block stack component, which similar to the alpha stack, allows you to make vertical stacks of components. We've got a heading here, which is this right here, the same as the other headings of the sections. We've got another stack with some options for the padding and border, basically to make it look like a card. Then we have an inline stack, which creates a horizontal row for this header and the 5 stars, which is actually, I just put it as an image since that was the easiest way to kind of get that working. And then at the very bottom, we've got the actual review text. And this is the text or the review details that we got directly from our admin app. So if we went into our app and made some changes there and then came and refreshed this page, then it should be updated automatically. So if we come back over here, let's do a customer name of John Smith. All right, and we click save. And that should update when we click refresh. And there we go. Now we've got this running locally. There are a couple more steps to be able to get it in the store. So if we come back here to the terminal, run npm run deploy, then that will let us deploy this extension and actually push it live so that you can see it in your store and configure it. So let's go deploy the same way and deploy to push changes. All right, so that has been deployed to Shopify. So now in order to actually push this live so that merchants can start using it in their store, if you come back to the partner dashboard and open up the app page for our new app, then if you come down to app setup, extensions, the extensions option, then you can see our app extension right here. It's in the draft status. So you click on that, and then you're going to want to click create version, create, and then publish. And then that makes it live to merchants that have your app installed. Let's enable the preview as well, since we're on a development store. So now if we go back to our store, and then if we open up the online store, and then go to customize. Okay, and then we're going to click this drop down and go to checkout. And then over here, there should be an option to add the app. So we'll click add. And there we go. So we just went to the checkout page. And this is all within the store theme customizer. You go to the checkout page, we added the app, and now it's right here. And since it's dynamic, we can go ahead and click this and move it to different places in the checkout. So that kind of gives a freedom to the merchant to really move it to wherever they need it to be. We'll click save here. And then let's go back and actually check out the online store. And let's go here, let's go check out. And this is what a customer would see now. This is a customer view when they're checking out, and they've got the review right here. It shows up instantly. And that is really the whole process of setting up an admin app plus a checkout UI extension that actually works. We can come in here, update the customer details and the review text. Let's just update this just for fun, and come back and review this and restart the checkout page, reload it, and we can see that it updates instantly. So all within about 30 minutes, we were able to do all of that, set up the admin app plus a checkout UI extension, push it live so merchants can use it on their store, and it actually works with updating and reading the Metafield values. And customers will be able to see that in the checkout page. So that process was made super quick thanks to Gadget. By taking care of essentially the entire backend, setting up the database, configuring auth routes and everything, and all we needed to do was start writing code. So whether this is your first time creating an app or it's your 100th time, you can see how Gadget simplifies the whole process for us. As always, there will be links in the description for everything I went over today, for the Shopify documentation, the Gadget documentation and sign up link, the checkout UI extensions. Everything is going to be in the description. I'll also have a link in there that you can use to fork my Gadget project over to your account. So you'll basically be able to clone the project with the data models and the code and everything and bring it directly over to your account so you can start modifying it and adding to it and just follow along with the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, if you end up using Gadget, please do me a favor. Let me know in the comments below, or send me an email or DM me on Twitter. And also just let me know if this video helped you out, so I can continue making content like this in the future. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.